Hello and happy St. Patrick's Day. My name is Scott Wrighton and I serve as Decatur's city manager, and it's my pleasure week after week to bring you updates about the COVID pandemic and about what's going on in your Decatur city government. As always, I'd like to begin with the latest COVID numbers. The positivity rate for our Region 6 part of the state now sits at 2.0%, and for here in Macon County, the positivity rate is 1.7%. Now, while those numbers, those key indicators are pretty good, they both edged up just a little bit since I reported numbers to you last week. It's too early to know whether or not that small uptick is the result of premature relaxations of some of the rules and safeguards for preventing the spread of the virus, or if it's just a statistical blip. But the city's position is that caution is still warranted, still use masks, still use social distancing. Even though many parts of our economy are open and many other businesses are open, and that's a good thing, we should, at least in our personal behavior, still be using these safeguards because I believe that they will have an effect on the statistics that we see from week to week. Here in Macon County, more than 33,000 people have received at least the first shot of the vaccine. 12.1% of our population is fully vaccinated, or about 1/3 of those who've received their first shot. I have to report to you that we're still behind as a county in the number of people who are vaccinated. Many of our sister counties here in central Illinois have higher vaccination rates. For some reason, the state of Illinois has been slow in delivering vaccines to Macon County, but I think that we are starting to close that gap and getting more vaccinations delivered to Macon County. So for those of you who've not had it yet, you can continue to consult with the Macon County Health Department and Crossing Healthcare for the availability and timings for their vaccination clinics. There's two other topics besides COVID that I thought I would talk about today with you. The first is spring litter problems. And the second has to do with some of the information that's been in the media about funding that local governments will be receiving and have received from the federal government, and what sorts of restrictions are on it and how it's going to affect our budget moving forward. First, with regard to litter, it seems that when the snow melts, then some of the debris that's been left on the snow and both in public and private places becomes more pronounced and obvious, and then it blows in the wind, and that's certainly been the case here in Decatur. So I want to encourage property owners everywhere, whether they're private or public, residential or non-residential and commercial, to take responsibility for picking up the litter off of your properties. It could be that the restrictions that related to the pandemic may have contributed unwittingly or unintentionally to the litter problem. People aren't allowed to eat in as much, and so they go through a drive-through restaurant or something like that, and they have food in their car, and then when they're done with it, perhaps out the window it goes. The city will certainly look at other places where it can have garbage cans available, but the responsibility on private property rests with the private property owner. The city does have recourse to litter citations, but we prefer that everybody take the responsibility to pick up litter both on residential property and on private property and private parking lots. As they have in years gone by, Beautify Decatur will be involved in some other programs later this spring to help encourage businesses to take responsibility for that. But at the end of the day, let's all do our part to eliminate litter and make Decatur a little bit prettier, both on public property and on private property. So finally, there's been a lot of discussion about money that's been provided both by the former Congress and administration as well as the current Congress and administration for COVID assistance. So let me talk a little bit about that and how it relates specifically to the city of Decatur. During the Trump administration, multiple pieces of legislation provided funding for COVID relief, and pretty much all of that money was in three groups. The first is direct COVID costs for PPE, costs for vaccines and other direct public health related costs and assisting people in fighting the virus. The second category of assistance in the previous administration was in financial assistance to companies as well as individuals who are external to the city government, such as small businesses many of whom were struggling to survive because of the economic effects of COVID. And then we also provided assistance to individuals in the form of rent and utility assistance. And perhaps you've heard me say, or you saw it on the news, that the mayor and city council took deliberate action to make sure that many of those funds from the previous administration got to an agency outside of city government that provided for rent and utility assistance to residents, as well as to small businesses who met certain criteria. And then there was a third category that had special recipients, such as public transit systems. So there was a lot of money available, but it wasn't available to us to use as we pleased. In fact, pretty much all of it was restricted, and all of it went to people outside of the city government. It wasn't available for us to cover the more than $3 million in revenue losses that we sustained in 2020. Now, in the Biden administration, this new piece of legislation that was recently adopted, called the American Rescue Plan, or ARP, as it'll come to be called, also has restrictions on it, which we have to abide by. The restrictions are, in some respects, similar, and some of them are new. The first category under this ARP plan is, again, direct COVID costs, PPE, medical care, testing, vaccines, and related costs directly dealing with the public health side of COVID. The second category is new, and that is called revenue replacement. In other words, to the extent that the city of Decatur can demonstrate that we had revenue loss directly as a result of COVID from 2019 to 2020, then some of those funds can be used to reimburse those one-time revenue losses. And finally, the ARP, this newest piece of legislation, allows substantial funding for certain infrastructure projects like water, sewer, and broadband projects. Now, we are fortunate to have these funds. Whether they came from the previous administration or the current ones, we're going to work hard to make sure that they're used appropriately. But the point that I want to really emphasize is that these, regardless of which piece of legislation they came from, all of them are one-time revenues. And so because they are one-time revenues, they are best applied to one-time expenses. It is simply not prudent to increase, say, permanent staffing with one-time revenues, because if we do that, it puts an added burden on the local taxpayer to pay the higher costs of that personnel in the out years when the one-time revenues go away. And I can assure you, and have said in the past, that the mayor and council are keen to not increase the tax burden on local taxpayers, which is why there'll probably be a lot of attention to both how we conform to the regulations and use the money only as it is restricted and is supposed to be used, but also acknowledge the fact that these are one-time revenues that should be used for one-time expenses. I hope this has been a useful update for you on what's going on in local government that deals with some of the current issues, and I look forward to talking with you again next week, and for all of the help and encouragement you provide to make Decatur better.